Good evening, everyone. We call to order the July 8, 2021 meeting of the Northern New Jersey Transportation Authority. Chair Randall is otherwise occupied on public business, so I'm a very poor substitute for Chair Randall this evening. We'll start off with a roll call, please. Margaret?
Sure. Chair Snyder?
Here.
Supervisor Alcott?
Here.
Chair Weaver?
Here.
Board Member Crystal?
Here.
Mayor Wilson?
Here.
Mayor Davis Younger?
Here.
Mayor Rochelle? Here. Councilman Bastel?
Here.
Senator Boysko? Delegate Watts? Here. Delegate Room?
Here.
Ms. Hines? Here. Mr. Cole?
Here.
Mayor Burke? Mr. Lynch?
Here.
Ms. Mitchell? I believe she's on the line. Ms. Mitchell?
She's on mute. We gotta get off mute.
Okay.
Is that it? I
Just
think
like that, we have a quorum,
we have a
so.
quorum. Thank you very much, Margaret. I really appreciate it. So everyone will notice the absence of something that has been on our agenda for, well, how many months now, years, decades, eons, whatever. The electronic meeting notification is no longer with us and hopefully will not come back if we're really lucky and we do what we should. So anyway, thanks everyone for being here in person. I want to thank the public for being here in person as well as viewing. First item on the agenda this evening is minutes of the June 10, 2021 meeting. Are there any comments or questions about them? There being none, I entertain a motion to approve them.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And one abstention? Thank you very much. That item passes unanimously, but with one abstention. The next items on the agenda are under the consent calendar. I think Executive Director would be appropriate to do a block vote on the consent calendar unless anyone wants any of the items removed. So first question is, do any authority members want any of the items under the consent calendar, that's items 4, 5, and 6 on the agenda removed? Okay, not hearing any. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar, which will include items 4, 5, and 6 on the agenda.
So moved.
Second? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. Those items passes unanimously under the consent calendar. The next action item is item number 7, approval of audit service for duplicate payments. Mr. Longate.
Thank you, Councilmember Snyder. One of the things we forgot to do when we allowed the table to be a little bit more free flowing is put a spot for the speaker. So, lesson learned. Thank you. This item, the duplicate payment detection audit, is our presentment of a problem to the Finance Committee and a potential solution. What it entails is we have experienced that the authority has actually made duplicate payments and has been presented with requests for duplicate payments that we've caught. So to recap the staff report, basically it's really upon the project sponsor to have the controls in place not to submit expenses to us twice for reimbursement. For us to try to police that, we would have to put everything in our general ledger system that they already have in theirs. While certainly we don't think that these duplications where they're caught or actually having occurred are anything purposeful, they're not, we don't believe they're anything other than a clerical mistake. Clearly, as the staff report goes into, we've seen a little over $1 million, one at 1.1 million, which was actually caught by the project sponsor. They notified us, they returned the funds to us. We had another one, $130,000 that actually stretched across. You can have one project that has several SPAs or separate contracts on it. And that one actually crossed 2 separate contracts. So it was basically an alert staff member that remembered it and said, questioned it, and so it didn't get paid. But what this has done is it's absolutely shown that we have a risk. So that's the problem. We don't really have a good way of quantifying the risk. We have experienced some small duplicate requests that we just kind of questioned as they came in. So we don't have a good number on that. But certainly when we have two that total over $1 million, it's something that needs to be looked into further. So in working with the finance committee, we discussed the situation with our independent external auditors and came up with what's called an agreed upon audit procedure. So it's not your typical audit function. It's a very specific tasking. And what the audit firm did was take a data approach because these reimbursements, a single reimbursement can be several hundred pages. So there's really no way for us to go back and look at these. So we're taking this data approach to it. And what we did is we fed information to the audit firm, knowing with the duplicates that we knew had occurred in there, and they caught them. So what we're proposing is taking roughly 9 projects or 9 SPAs as a test sample, and that represents $136,000 in reimbursed. I'm sorry, $136 million in reimbursed expenses. To give you a sense of scale of this, the authority since inception has reimbursed approximately $580 million. And we have, based on approved projects, we have roughly $2 billion more in reimbursements to make, just based on the projects that are currently approved. So what we propose to do is take this project selection, turn this information over to the auditors. There's a reason why we pick these projects. They are some of the more complex projects. They meet some characteristics that we can see in what we've already experienced. If the audit detects that they're duplicate payments, certainly we'll get the money back. But it'll also inform us as to what's happening on the project sponsor side, as well as if there's anything we can do on our side to help the project sponsors police these and eliminate these. If we come back and the audit says that we don't detect any duplicates, I have to be upfront with you. It doesn't mean there are none out there, because we're taking a sample set. But at least that will give us an assessment of the risk that we have out there. The cost for this process is $18,500, which is a large amount of money, relatively speaking, but it's pales in comparison to, I think, the risk that is out there. So once the audit process goes through, if it's approved tonight by the authority, the auditors are ready to start work on it. We'll have something back for the September meeting, the September finance meeting, and then later to the authority. And with that, I'll be pleased to answer any questions.
Sure. Are there any questions for Mr. Longy? I have one. This is sort of an iterative process, right? So certain findings from this initial audit indicate we need even a more robust approach, then that will be brought before the authority. Is that right? Okay. So this is really kind of the foundational work, just to double check and make sure that all the payments are appropriate and not duplicate payments, right? Okay. Thanks. Are there any other questions? Okay, not hearing any. I'm entertaining a motion. The suggested motion is in your packet on agenda item number 7.
Chair Snyder, I move approval of the attached agreed upon procedures audit agreement with Reconvenes LLP and budget and appropriate $18,500 from the operating budget reserve for this purpose.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Board Member Crystal. Any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? None, that item passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is approval of amendment to bylaws number 8. Mr. Longy, this is the Mr. Longy show.
3 more. This bylaws correction, if we go back to the June meeting, the GPC in May discovered that we actually were using the wrong title for our executive director. State law says that the authority will have the chief executive officer. So So all that this bylaw amendment does is change that title in the bylaws. We subsequently, obviously, will go through and change it on documents and policies and stuff like that, but that's all that this does. The bylaws change is required to be read at 2 meetings. So the first reading was June, this is July. As long as there are no changes to the proposal, and we're not proposing any changes in the second reading, then the authority can vote on it tonight. And with that, that's my staff report.
Sure. Any questions for Mr. Longo? Yes.
I just had to observe, I have no problem going through this process. But since a chief executive officer is not an uppercase, is not capitalized, have you asked for an opinion as to whether or not this is a generic category and we really don't have to have exactly the same title as a chief executive officer?
No.
It might be something that we delay this vote and ask that because you're gonna change stationery and signing agreements and all of that other sort of thing. There's no sense going through that if it passes muster as far as just a generic reference.
Okay. What do you think, Mr. Longo?
We can defer it. I'm assuming you're saying talk to the council.
Talk to councils, or I will also make an inquiry of legislative drafting, which has a number of protocols as to what they use in the code. And I will start there to see whether or not this has a generic reference aspect to it.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. We'll just defer this item? Yes.
Had the councils looked at this already, or?
No.
They know, okay. All right. Let's take a look.
Are people agreeable if we just defer, or do you want a motion to table? Just defer, okay, that item is deferred to the next meeting. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item number 9, compensation, amendment to employee handbook.
I will out of order for a moment and just note, especially for those wearing suit jackets, that the air conditioning on this side of the room was serviced today, therefore it's not working. So, I feel a little uncomfortable, that's the reason why. For those not wearing suit jackets, this is probably one of the rare times you're comfortable in. With that, this matter is the approval of compensation time amendments for the employee handbook. Tracy Baynard, our legislative liaison, the other side of her organization, the Wirewood Law Firm, sent us a bulletin saying that the General Assembly had basically made an overtime change in state code that says you can no longer pay somebody time and a half as far as time off. You have to pay them time and a half in cash. You're probably seeing this in your own policies. So all this item does is make a change to the employee handbook, which is basically an embodiment of the employee personnel policies, and it strikes paying time and a half for using time and a half as far as leave time. There's no impact on the authority as we do not have any employees who are overtime. Everybody is selling.
Good, thank you very much. Questions? Yes.
I might, notwithstanding Mr. Lundy's point about how this doesn't actually affect the authority, but I think what would be interested, I don't know if our members of the General Assembly have any insight on this. Actually, just heard Delegate Mullen, who I think introduced it, interviewed today, sort of had the impression that this was a bill that he hadn't really intended to apply to the public sector, and there may be some opportunity for amendments in the upcoming session. Has anybody else heard that? Or should we probably just assume this is going to be permanent law of the land? Not to put anyone on the spot, I can also, follow up in his office and ask him. Well, just insofar as you all might be talking with the caucus, if you've heard anything, is the only reason I ask.
So, Mr. Chair, I have not had any conversations with anyone, but having been a former staff member for a public body and was a part-timer who ended up working many, many hours above and beyond what my schedule was, it was quite convenient for us to have the option of the time off as opposed to the extra pay. So I'd be happy to follow up with whoever
you so much. I'm thinking this may be something for discussion with VML, for example. I wouldn't be surprised if our chair, or the Fairfax chair, who's the chair of VACO, is also talking about it in this context. So I'd love to take you up on that offer. Thank you. But certainly prepared to support the motion because A, it's the right thing to do to bring us into line, and B, as Mr. Lucky said, it's probably not actually germane to the authority staff.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would also just note that the 3 members of the General Assembly who are actually on the MBTA, this did not go through any of our committees. That's some, you really have to try to get that, but,
And I assume this again is broadly stated as was just mentioned, and because of the timeline of short sessions in the General Assembly, comp time is just absolute standard operating procedure, particularly for budget staff as well as legislative drafting. So let's jump into the intent.
Okay, so, because it's current law, I guess we need to make the change now, but we may end up changing it back. Okay, thank you very much for the great discussion from the General Assembly members, and it will be noted that it did not come through any of their committees. Thank you. I entertain a motion then to move the authority to approve the attached changes to section 3.5 of the MBTA employee handbook as noted below.
so moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Second.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Item passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Now, approval of Chief Executive Officer position description and compensation consulting engagement. Mr. Lundy.
Thank you. This item has been working through the Governance and Personnel Committee, which met earlier this evening. They did make effectively one change at the committee level motion, which will transfer here, and that is to have the council review the contract and procurement contract for this. So when you look at a motion, I think that would be an appropriate addition to a motion. The GPC asked us to issue an RFP after several months of trying to figure out how to quantify and come up with a salary level for the executive director. The committee had tried several approaches over several months to come up with a data-based or data-driven type of process. And after exploring a number of options with state agencies and stuff, we came to the conclusion that we just needed to hire a consultant to do it. The contract and the consulting engagement is basically 2 things. Completely review, reestablish the job description. The job description was developed in 2013 by committee and hasn't been changed yet. It wasn't even a committee, it was actually a working group. And it hasn't been updated since that time. Additionally, to take that job description, which would involve consultation with authority members, and then use what's called a factor analysis, a term I learned through this process, to take the key aspects of that job description and figure out what they are worth on the market. One of the issues, as I discussed with the GPC, is you can pretty well rate a CFO position. Size of balance sheet, level of risk, debt levels, all sorts of ratios and stuff like that. Much more difficult to come up with an equivalency for the position that Monica is occupying. The output of this contract would be a revised position description and a correlation between that position description and compensation with a medium, and maximum figure. There's also something that is to be based on the function of the position, not so much the individual. So hopefully it will become a much better starting point if at some point this gets reviewed again. With that, I'd be pleased to answer the question.
Thanks very much. As was mentioned, this was discussed by the GPC committee earlier tonight that agreed to move forward on the recommendation to the authority, but subject to review by council of councils. The reason for that is that the proposed group, actually their bid was higher than the second. And so we wanted to make sure that there were no inadvertent inconsistencies with procurement law. I think, Mr. Longy, you felt that the value added, and this is a personal services contract, so there's more flexibility than buying pencils or buying notebooks. That's really old school, isn't it? Now it's computers and whatever, So anyway, but that was the basis of the discussion, that we were convinced that there was value added, that it was a good thing to do. I think when you look at the materials from the selected group, they look very impressive, including who they've done similar work for. But we just wanted a final review by council to council. So I think the motion would be to move authority approval of the group, the Millennium Group, subject to review by the council of councils, and additionally move the authority budget and appropriate $25,000 from the operating budget reserve for that purpose. So,
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to make that motion.
thank you. Thank you very much.
If I have a second, I'd love to speak to it. Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, I had to miss GBC tonight, but have been party to these conversations to date, and just wanted to speak in favor of it for a moment. I think we've had conversations in the past in context of Ms. Backman's review that we have sort of competing tensions, which is that we have an executive director, maybe now CEO, who is worth her weight in gold, but of course, weight in gold is not really a comparable standard for us. And if we are looking to, we hope compensate her appropriately and keep her for the long run, it would really behoove us to have a greater sense of who her comparators in the market are. And I just wanted to say, I think Mr. Lunke was displaying some humility in mentioning that there were steps taken to look for alternatives rather than just hiring a consulting firm. He went to great lengths talking to the appropriate state agencies to see if we could maybe sort of ride off with some of the services they have. I think a lot of stones were overturned in the effort to do this and lead us on the GBC to the conclusion that an external consulting agency would be helpful. And then I'll just say, speaking at least for myself, in context of what you were saying, Mr. Snyder, I was very impressed with this proposal from the Millennium Group. I mean, I think it represents not only an opportunity to sort of return us a set of numbers of comparators, but actually scope out this job in a way that would serve our current executive director, I hope, and future leadership. So just very strongly in support.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Okay, there being none, the motion has been made and seconded to approve the recommendation for the Millennium Group with review by the Council of Councils, and then to appropriate $25,000 from the operating budget. Any questions about what the motion is? Okay, thank you. The motion has been made and seconded. No further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon. Well, Mr. Longy, I'm sure we'll welcome you back in a future meeting, but you've certainly had your time here before the lights tonight. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your great work. And that's true of all of the staff. It's just, you all have done a fantastic job transitioning to the total sort of online model and making the transition back. So thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item number 11, approval of endorsement of Fairfax County's application to the US DOT for rebuilding American infrastructure with sustainability and equity, a RAISE grant. Ms. Backman.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would note that Fairfax County is seeking authority endorsement for the RAISE grant for their Richmond Highway Bus Rapid Transit project. Just as a reminder, the authority did allocate $250 million to this project in our inaugural 6-year program, FY 2018 to 2023. So we have vetted this project where it actually was the project that has received the highest award ever from the authority. Fairfax County is seeking $25 million from the RAISE grant, which is the maximum amount allowable. And the applications are due July 12th by 5 p.m.
All right. Any discussion or questions for Monica? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, I would just note a few things here. Just number one, that typically speaking, localities don't have to go through us in order to apply for a RAISE grant, but because this has already gone through the MBTA, it's certainly prudent of Tom Johnny from Fairfax County to just request additional support. So I'm certainly happy to support that. But I've been in discussions with Mayor Rischel as well as some other folks back in Prince William about basically seeing if we can apply for a race grant for the Route 28 Star Study that we've already completed, for example, like it's multi-level and it's innovative intersection design. And I actually spoke to Secretary Buttigieg about that 2 weeks ago over at the White House. So, I'm really hopeful, or was it a week ago, or was it? But I'm really hopeful that we can actually start seeing a lot more race grants coming out through our Northern Virginia localities because the federal government wants to spend the money. It's free money, it's on the table. All of us should be encouraging our localities to really apply for these grants by the top because this is a good thing.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions?
So moved.
Supervisor Alcorn moves authority endorsement of Fairfax County Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity Raise Grant application for the Richmond Highway Bus Rapid Transit Project. It's been moved by Supervisor Alcorn. Is there a second? Second, Senator Boyce. Any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item passes unanimously. Thank you very much for that. So we've got a couple important discussion items this evening. The first is at the last authority meeting, we visited, over a few minutes about what was the TPB long-range plan and various issues that have been raised in the context of that. And I think we had a very fruitful discussion. I think it led to what was a very positive general outcome in terms of moving forward. All the projects are important to us, but also making commitments to address climate issues very aggressively in the very near future. It's sort of a midterm thing, so we're not waiting. However, somewhat surprising, the issue came up with Maryland not being in agreement with itself over the I-270 and American Legion Bridge project. That led to a debate which went on and on, and it was clear that the state and the counties were not seeing eye to eye on it. So various votes were taken, and I think the final weighted vote was to strike the 270 project in its entirety from the long-range plan. However, since then, there have been correspondence, and we have copies that we're handing out now from our very own Virginia Department of Transportation, as well as several letters from NDOT about it. And so that's where we are right now. Monica, could you sort of provide some additional?
Mr. Snyder, I will note you did a great job with the summary regarding where we are. Again, there was a proposed substitute resolution. When we met last month, we had some questions about the alternative resolution that the TPB would consider, but there was that resolution was rescinded. A proposed substitute resolution that was really led by Virginia was brought forward, and it was, I guess it was drafted similarly to what you had worked on and crafted. The compromise resolution did have two parts, not removing any project from the Visualize 2045 update, and it also addressed the climate change mitigation by starting with a zero-based budget, with some certain exceptions to start at the end of the climate change study. The TPB is undertaking a climate change study at this time. They're supposed to be finished with the study by the end of this calendar year. So once they get the result from that study, they will use that to inform an early update to Visualize 2045, which would be in 2024. So, and as you noted, that resolution passed, but it was immediately amended to remove the 270 project.
Thank you very much. I thought we'd invite John Lynch. Welcome. Thank you for meeting with us, and we look forward to working with you in the future. John, I think it might be helpful to learn a little bit about VDOT's position on it, and this is more fact-finding than anything. I think what is the potential impact on Virginia projects of either keeping the I-270 project in or removing it? John?
Well, I think just to follow up on what Monica summarized in terms of the status. So, the action June 16th, which took out the 495 270 project. There have been 3 letters that have been sent to TPB, 2 by Maryland, 1 by Virginia. The first letter was June 21st, where MDOT, it was informed of the TPB, but based on the removal of the project that was going to be funded with private funds, they would have to redo their financial plan for conformity. And that would mean removing, they wouldn't be getting the $6 million, but they still have a need at the American Legion Bridge to rehab as well as improvements on 495 and possibly 270. So they would have to remove other projects that that were in the plan to essentially balance the budget. That was a June 21st letter. They did say that they would follow up with the projects that they would have to remove, and they did that yesterday. They sent us a second letter that basically asked that the provision the project be put back in its entirety. They have phase one south. They call phase one south, which is from the American Legion Bridge up to 370, which is the intercounty connector, and then the phase one north is from the intercounty connector up to 70. So they did request that both those be put in. And if that does fail, then they did provide a list of projects that would have to be removed. On July 1st, VDOT did send a letter to TPB, which you have a copy of, that essentially asked that the same thing, that they amend the proposal to include the Maryland 495 270 project, and it gave an alternative plan if that wasn't approved, then at least put the project in, which they call phase one south, the I-495 270 plan, which extends to I-370. And the reason for that gives Maryland a viable project from a financial standpoint with their private partner, but it also will help with the congestion at the American Legion Bridge in terms of getting people there, because if they don't do that, they just went up to the spur for 270, it still didn't solve the congestion issue. So our position, we have the 495 next project, which is in the process. That project did receive its finding of no significant impact from the Federal Highway Administration. So that project is ready to move forward. It is moving forward. And that project does have independent utility from the Maryland project. However, the benefits that the region would get with the Maryland project in terms of enhanced transit across into Maryland, as well as the bike ped connection and other aspects that are in the Maryland plan, would certainly enhance the overall project. So that's where Virginia is in terms of that support to try to get the entire project at least up to I-370.
Can you review for us, really, since we are Northern Virginia Authority, what is the impact? Well, explain in a little more detail what our plans were in Virginia to connect with Maryland at the bridge, and then what would be lost, in your view, if the 270 project remains stricken?
Well, I think we all know the American Legion Bridge is a bottleneck for the region in both directions. I mean, both coming into Virginia as well as leaving Virginia. And although the 495 next, which ties into the GW Parkway, and then the Maryland project picks up at the GW Parkway and goes north. Certainly, we're not going to solve the congestion problem for the American Legion Bridge at that point. So, although the 495 next project, would still function adequately, but you're still going to have that bottleneck at the American Legion Bridge. In addition, based on the express lanes in Virginia, 95, 495, as well as I-66 inside the Beltway, we have seen increases in transit as well as HOV usage. And the last study was the beginning of 2019. Obviously, doing studies during 2020 isn't going to do anybody any good because nobody was driving at that point. So, or very few. So I think, you know, with the extension into Maryland and the commitment that Virginia made of I believe it was 2.1 million a year for operating transit as well as a capital improvement investment of 5.6 to buy the stock. You know, that investment is going to be somewhat limited because they'll only be, you know, up to the American Legion Bridge, and with the extension to the express lane, that transit money will be a lot more effective and move more individuals as well.
Sure.
Yeah, if I could just follow up on that, thank you. I know, I am particularly interested in the idea of something like a BRT-esque system, and when Mr. Brule presented to us on the project, the study, I think she had sort of characterized it as the additional lanes or capacity were necessary but not sufficient to get there, was sort of my impression of how she characterized it. And so I'm encouraged. I think I'm hearing you say maybe that the level of commitment to transit, once the lanes are there to allow for higher speed bus service, is maybe a little more solid than was my impression when we last heard. And so I just wanted to clarify too, I think that the takeaway from what you've shared with us vis-a-vis the Maryland project is that the improvements for single occupancy vehicles or high occupancy vehicles, individual vehicles, would be better with the Maryland project, but we move forward anyway as the Commonwealth. Is that also true with the transit piece?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, but like I said, with ending at the American Legion Bridge, it wouldn't be as effective.
The buses would still have.
And the buses get stuck.
Yeah.
That's what happens with, without the Maryland project, without widening the bridge in some manner and having some dedicated lanes for bus and high occupancy vehicles and riding, the buses will just get stuck in the same.
So I guess that maybe begs the question of, is it true that the Commonwealth would move forward with the project if Maryland's
With
financing fell through, or Maryland's?
495, yes.
Yeah.
We're yes, the deal has been struck. The secretary did write, and Walter, if I have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure the secretary did send a letter to the Fairfax County Board committing the transit money and the capital investment. So that is a commitment from the secretary. But as John said, no place to run those buses until the bridge really gets wider because they're supposed to connect to Silver Spring.
Supervisor Allen first, and then Delegate.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the background information and what VDOT's doing. I have to say, for me, this is my nightmare coming true because we actually have a situation with 495 next. Extending that to the American Legion Bridge will be the first time that we would get hot lanes and it not be a win-win for people in the hot lanes and the general purpose lanes. If Maryland doesn't widen the bridge, people in the general purposes lanes are going to spend an average of about 4 minutes more in rush hour in the general purpose lanes. So Maryland has to move forward with this. Either that or, Maryland has to move forward with this. So, hopefully we'll see the vote turn with TPB. That actually was the first TPB meeting I missed. I had my 25th anniversary trip that we were talking about earlier. Actually, Chairman McKay was sitting in for me on that one, so I'm sitting in.
Yeah, he's mentioned that with,
Yes, I bet he did.
the total voice aside.
So I would encourage everybody to talk to your colleagues, anybody who has questions about this. For me, frankly, it's in part, it's not just a mass transit issue and making sure that the express buses are going to get across the bridge like they need to. It's also a question of equity. Are we really going to build an extension of the hot lanes where, in order to take advantage of it and benefit from it, you have to pay hot lanes prices. So that's, I really, really hope we get the votes at TPP. But anyway, that's my position.
Thank you, Delegate Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess maybe I have some questions for Mr. Lynch, and just a few back and forth. So the first one is, let's say we go through it with the next, with 495 next, Maryland doesn't do anything, right? Who at that point is then gonna be responsible for future upgrades or just the other issues that we need, in the case that American Legion Bridge is, deemed strictly deficient in terms of, not the top deck, but in the areas underneath, for example. Let's just start with there, and we'll kind of build from that.
Well, in Maryland, still plans with the action, if the 45, 270 project does not move forward, that was their plan was to pull money from other projects, which now they've sent to TPD, which projects they would be, totaling, somewhere about $1 billion to $1.5 billion that they would utilize for maintenance and rehab for the American Legion Bridge, no expansion, and other improvements that they have identified along 270 and 495.
Sure, and one of the reasons that I wanted to even just bring up that part of the bridge is when we had that tractor trailer flip over, was it last year, I think, beginning of last year, when it blocked, the repercussions of one vehicle flipping on its side extended through at least 7 localities, I think. If you went through, if you are in jurisdictions, if you go through DC, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Alexandria, Arlington, Loudoun, Fairfax, even all the way to Prince William, you were feeling traffic congestion issues. All, not to mention Falls Church, of course, sure. But, just to really kind of hammer home that if we have any further complications or issues with the American Legion Bridge in and of itself, the ramifications for the region are perilous. They are real. It is absolutely dangerous if we have another shutdown or another issue. So I just want to really just make sure that maintenance schedule at the very least, no matter what happens, in terms of Maryland fighting amongst itself, that's not going to be jeopardized.
Right. And we do have, I think the one saving grace for that is, although the bridge is in Maryland, VDOT does have a 20% share on the maintenance and operation. So, there is a stake in it for us as well, and it won't simply be.
And then the last thing I think is, remember personally, the last time that we had this conversation, we had talked about the environmental issues with this, and we also really talked a lot, like online and off, like we discussed also mass transit component with it. And at the time, I guess maybe what's the best way to put it? It's not that mass transit wasn't being considered; it was just kind of being considered as an afterthought in terms of how it was being discussed with us about it. And so I guess the last thing here is, if Next goes forward without the Maryland component on this, how does that change basically just the incorporation of mass transit into the Next project itself, regarding the fact that what Ms. Hines was just talking about in terms of buses coming up from Maryland or any other mass transit coming up from Maryland is simply just not going to have, that extra bandwidth on their side of the bridge.
Right. I mean, and, I think formerly there was transit across the American Legion Bridge, and they stopped running it just because of the congestion and the ineffectiveness of it. And I think the same thing could happen here without the Maryland project. I believe that we will see an improvement, or I know from the studies, we will see an improvement on the local streets, even, with 495 next, so you'll get less cut-through traffic, because they're essentially now able to get up to where they would come on anyway. That would be the biggest benefit of 495 next, without the Maryland project. It certainly greatly enhanced the Maryland project as well.
Thanks. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, I hope that this project is restorative. I know it was very concerning to see something like this unfold in a relatively brief period of time where it could come forward forward and be removed after so much process had placed it into that list. It was an unfortunate precedent, and I'm concerned that this is gonna present a problem in the future, that we could very well be revisiting this issue or some permutation of it in the future. So I hope it does not serve as a precedent, but I have concerns that it might. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yes.
A detailed question, perhaps Supervisor Alcorn can answer. You mentioned weighted voting. Could you give me a little background on what the weighted voting, so that I get a better idea of the dynamics of ProCon?
Yeah. See, that's the question I've been asking too, because it is gonna come down to a vote count, at the next TPD meeting. 15 votes overall, 3 jurisdictions, DC, Virginia, Maryland, each have 5 votes. The departments of transportation, each get, it's half those votes, I believe, is that right? And then the rest is divided amongst local governments. So Fairfax County gets almost 1 vote out of the 15, and Supervisor Walkinshaw and I serve on that, so we each get almost half of those.
And so, and Fairfax County gets almost 1 vote because of population.
Correct.
Yes.
So, and it gets, sorry, it gets really complicated if somebody abstains. And it makes the counting much more complicated. So DC, for example, the Department of Transportation abstained, which meant that the vote from the council carried all 5, not just 2 and a half.
And a follow-up question from me.
Sure.
So the 555 goes back line to men, or not to the contrary, it has nothing to do with population?
Within the, that's correct. The 555 is just 3 jurisdictions, regardless of population. Within each of the 5, at least for Maryland and Virginia, I understand there is. Mary's not there. I know in Virginia it's by population. I'm pretty sure Maryland as well. It's a local government side.
One final comment. The reason for that line of questioning is that my concern is that there's a lack of understanding in a core, neat and tidy, established grid of transit, what it takes to do transit when we start getting out beyond the Beltway, and the gathering points, and how you have to have an infrastructure that will take, and we've all been saying express buses, I hope we're saying HOV of all kinds, so that we get as many people as possible and as few vehicles as possible. I just don't think that that is understood within the established core. Enough said.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Mostly the purpose of the discussion tonight was to gather information, get a level set in terms of the factual basis. I did have a technical discussion with Conti at COG, and he agreed with MDOT's analysis that if they didn't get the funding, that it would affect the long-range plan. It would require coming back in August, and it would require significant changes in the whole Maryland project list. So that point in the MDOT letter was validated by COG staff. One other thought, when Virginia, when we approved the I-95 HO2 lanes, there were some specific provisions about transit, about environmental issues, and I'm thinking maybe that would offer some fruitful, positive discussion. But it's something we've done, there's precedent for it, and we resolve things here. So anyway, anything else, anybody else wants to raise or discuss, or any other questions at this point?
Mr. Chair, I mean this not at all tongue in cheek. Following this, and the situation between MDOT and Montgomery County in particular has just made me profoundly grateful for the relationship that this region enjoys with VDOT. You know, it really is, we resolve things here, is exactly as you said, and you know, of all of the big transformative projects VDOT has embraced in the last 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, we've all really been done in consultation with us. Not to say we always agree, but thank you to our VDOT and CTV representatives. Maybe seeing the alternative is maybe especially grateful.
And I will add as well that VDOT personnel were fundamental in terms of the basic architecture of the approach that was voted on. So thanks as well. So, all right, well, I suspect that there will be communications as appropriate between the TPB representatives, in fact, expect it. And this was a very useful discussion. Thanks much. And if anybody has anything else to add, please bring it through Monica and we'll share it accordingly. All right, moving on to the next discussion item, commuting trends in Northern Virginia.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this will be brief. Last month, we gave you a presentation on the commuting trends in Northern Virginia since COVID. And because it takes a while to do, I guess, the whole processing of the data, and we want to work with NBTC, we have some high-level analysis or updates from where we were last month. So just to note, still about in this region, about 47% of the workers in the DC metro region are work from home in June. Some of the highway travel trends, volumes on the freeways and major arterials in Northern Virginia have been trending upward. In June, the volumes are reported to be about 92% of the pre-COVID conditions compared to 89% in May. The travel pattern by time of day, this is something that's interesting because the AM peak, what has been the traditional AM peak, is no longer the traditional AM peak. What we're finding is there's a decline in the travel during what has been known as the traditional AM peak. And there was an increase in midday travel. So building up to similar evening rush hour conditions. So the PM peak is still about the same, but the AM peak is different. We're seeing more of a peak in the midday. So this is something that we're following as well. And as what we noted last month, VRE as of June 1 started their full service again. PRTC, I know Metro is trying to implement more service as well. So when you meet in September, because you're not meeting in August, we'll have more details on where we are regarding commuting trends. But we just wanted to know particularly that the AM peak is no longer the AM peak. And we don't know if that will stay, will that change? We need to find out how that, when the kids go back to school, how that will be impacted. You know, will there be more people going into the office? But on the flip side, there are more employers that are now implementing teleworking policies. So all of this is information that we're following, and we hope to give you a more in-depth discussion and presentation at your September meeting.
Thank you. Any questions? I think at NBTC we had the transit ridership data, which is coming back. I guess we had a good day for the fireworks.
It was a great day for transit ridership for fireworks, and that's one of the things we want to know. Like, okay, we saw a peak because of, you know, we had holidays, and now things are opening up. People want to get out and about. Will that continue during the midweek, and just how will that play out? We do want to see what ridership has been for VRE since they went back to their normal schedule. Because when I talked to Rich Dalton a few weeks ago, he noted that a lot of the customers were saying, hey, we weren't riding VRE because this truncated schedule didn't really work for us. So that was one of the reasons why VRE wanted to go back to their pre-COVID schedule, just to make sure that they can be available for a lot of the riders. So these are just some things that we're walking through, talking to the transit agencies. We have to circle back with NBTC because they're the ones that's doing the analytics, if you will, on a lot of the transit data.
Right. And one other tidbit, not so positive, is that highway safety has actually deteriorated, even though miles driven was a lot lower in 2020. Fatalities and serious injuries were up nationwide, and I think in Virginia as well. Yes. So there clearly is something going on that is a significant challenge for all of us.
We need traffic then.
Yeah.
We need traffic then. More traffic.
Well, it's true. Congestion slows people down and speeding up.
People forget how to drive.
Yeah. If they ever do. Yeah.
I do think it'd be great if we could have more speed cameras on the interstates that could actually give tickets. That's a general assembly issue. When we sit at CTV and we have a safety report every month, and it's pretty depressing. When you're trying all kinds of stuff that interrupt it, but when people are driving 80 miles an hour, the troopers aren't, not enough troopers to ticket it. So,
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that is a real serious issue, is that we have a shortage of state troopers. Right now, they are not recruiting the troopers that they want, and we're seeing huge amounts of them retiring. And this is going to be one of them.
Just to note that we did actually, in the budget that we approved last time, we did include additional pay for state troopers. I think it was, they got either 3 or 5% total increase. And I know that we're going back into General Assembly, and our finance chair will be able to deal with this better than that. I'm sure I can speak to it, but just, we have a number of options that are going to be on the table come August as well. So, I expect us to continue making some progress.
We have the risk of going on too long, if I may. I'll put on my sitting on the Criminal Justice Courts Committee. And the debate constantly is, just because you can, should you maybe have Big Brother that can take all of this footage of what cars traveling when and what time and all those other things. A lot of specters are raised about that possibility. And then there's always been the problem with red light cameras, etc., about proof of who was driving. And is the traffic offense attached to the vehicle, or do you have to have the trooper on site who knows exactly who with that driver's license was the offender? So this is why it doesn't happen. And we continue to rely on personnel.
And the Council of Governments also, TPD, approved a whole set of safety recommendations for local governments and others to take a look at. So it's good to see, and it's something that should not, I think, fall off of our screens at all as we're dealing with transportation issues.
Mr. Chair, I would note, we are actually looking at that as part of the update to transaction, trying to look at what the Council of Governments adopted and see how we can incorporate some of those safety elements as part of the transaction update.
Great. Anything else on this? Next item on the agenda, Governance and Personnel Committee report. You already heard it, so thanks much. Next item, Chair Mayor Richel.
Finance Committee met June 17th. The committee recommended the approval of the duplicate payment detection audit as discussed earlier. The committee also received an update regarding the issue of allowable and appropriate reimbursements to project sponsors. It is hoped that the consensus will be reached at the regional staff level regarding a clearer definition of indirect cost. The major goal of the study is for transparency, equity, consistency, accountability as to what expenses are appropriate for reimbursement. The issue will proceed through various regional meetings prior to any final recommendations. And Mr. Long, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that was a great summary. What you just did, any further action? Sure.
I beg your pardon?
Any further action?
I don't think so, unless you want Mr. Long to report on.
What do you want to report on? Portfolio is doing well, revenues are going well, and the operating budget is underspending. So. That's actually going to take a little longer. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Executive Director's report.
Mr. Chair, the only thing I'd like to highlight, at the June meeting, you approved the issuance for the call for project for the FY 2022 to 2027 6-year program update. The call was issued July 1. The portal closes October 1st. So we are talking to all of the localities and agencies regarding projects. But again, thank you for the electronic application system. It makes our lives easier, it makes your staff lives easier, but the application deadline is October 1. Concurrently, we are in the process of updating transaction. So next year will be a busy year for us. We will have tentatively the approval of the 6-year program update next summer. And then transaction approval update in fall, early winter. So a busy year, but we can think about that next year. But that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quick question that, if we have a project that is already being applied to be put on transaction, even though the transaction approval won't happen until next year, can we still apply it for, the update to the 6-year plan early next year?
Not this current one, because it has to be in the current transaction, the one that the authority adopted in October of 2017. And then when we do the next 6-year, because we do these 6-year program updates biannually, so we'll be doing another call in the not too distant future, not FY, but calendar year 2023, then you can apply. But just as a reminder, the law requires that any project that the authority funds with regional revenues, it has to be in transaction, the long-range transportation plan.
Thank you. Any other questions from Monica? Thank you. So the next item is closed session. Do we actually have a closed session?
I would, this is a little awkward for me because it's about me. I would know Chair Randall requested that you defer this item until September.
Yeah, it would be a very short positive. We'll defer for now. Thanks much. I figured I'd ask somebody who knew. So, thanks. Any other business that anyone would like to bring before the authority tonight? Okay, Sue, you have my thanks. You really, what a great group to be part of, and the staff is fabulous. So thank you all very much, and we entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent.
We're adjourned.